The silence had texture out here. Adrian Cole had been alone long enough to know that 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days of cataloging the universe's background noise while floating in a tin can at the edge of human ambition. Forward Station Epsilon wasn't much to look at, a collection of pressurized cylinders bolted together with the aesthetic sensibility of someone who'd never heard the word cozy. It hung in space like a lost paperclip, orbiting nothing in particular, positioned precisely where the nebula's electromagnetic chatter could be heard without the interference of nearby stellar bodies. Adrian sat at his workstation, watching another wave of data scroll across 3 holographic displays that flickered with the enthusiasm of technology that knew it was outdated. The signal he'd been tracking for the past 6 hours had resolved itself into, he squinted at the readout, what appeared to be a mathematical sequence that, when translated through the station's linguistic algorithms, suggested instructions for preparing wheat-based breakfast foods. Cosmic pancake recipes. Fantastic. Station, he said to the empty air, please tell me I'm not looking at the universe's opinion on breakfast. The AI's voice emerged from speakers that had developed an unfortunate rattle 3 weeks ago. Analysis suggests the pattern is naturally occurring electromagnetic resonance shaped by nebular gas distribution. The resemblance to culinary instructions is coincidental. So the cosmos is accidentally telling me how to make pancakes. That is one interpretation. What's another interpretation? That you have been alone too long and are projecting meaning onto random data. Adrian leaned back in his chair, which squeaked, everything on the station squeaked now, as if the entire structure was slowly developing opinions about his presence. You're supposed to be on my side, station. I am programmed for accuracy, not emotional support. However, I can play something soothing if you wish. Before Adrian could respond, elevator music began filtering through the comm system. It was the 3rd time today. He'd tried reprogramming that particular quirk out of the AI's personality matrix, but it kept reasserting itself like a peculiarly stubborn weed. I hate you, Adrian said without heat. Your vital signs suggest you find my presence comforting. My vital signs are lying. He rubbed his eyes and glanced at the chrono display. 2300 hours station time, which meant absolutely nothing out here where the nearest star was just another point of light among billions, but humans needed their arbitrary divisions of darkness. He'd maintained the routine religiously, wake at 0600, breakfast of reconstituted something, 6 hours of signal analysis, lunch of reconstituted something else, 6 more hours staring at the universe's indifference, dinner of whatever was left in the supply lockers, 2 hours of pretending to relax, sleep. Repeat until rescue or madness, whichever came first. The isolation hadn't been accidental. Adrian had volunteered for this posting, had actually competed for it against 2 other xenolinguists who probably had better sense. Earth Stellar Command didn't ask too many questions when someone wanted to spend months alone in deep space, they just did the psychological screening, confirmed you weren't currently suicidal, and shipped you out with 3 years' worth of freeze-dried provisions and a station AI that had apparently trained under an elevator music DJ. He stood, stretching muscles that had begun to forget what gravity felt like even with the station's rotation providing 0.6 Earth normal. The sleep pod beckoned from the habitat module, a coffin-sized compartment with a mattress that had the consistency of optimistic cardboard. But it was his coffin-sized compartment, his terrible mattress, his section of absolute solitude where nobody could ask questions about why he'd needed to leave. Adrian ran through his nightly checklist with the practiced efficiency of repetition. Airlock seals, secure. Life support, nominal. External sensors, functioning within expected parameters. Communication array, still pointed at Earth, still receiving nothing but the weekly automated supply ship updates and the occasional data packet from command reminding him that his contract had 7 months remaining. Station, any anomalies to report? One minor event at 22:47 hours. Brief spatial distortion detected at range 17,000 kilometers. Likely debris or ice particulate interacting with local gravitational fields. Likely. 97% probability. Would you like me to investigate further? Adrian considered this. In 3 months, the station had detected approximately 400 anomalies, all of which had turned out to be exactly what they seemed: space junk, micrometeorites, or particularly ambitious hydrogen atoms. The universe was full of things that registered as unusual until you looked closer and realized they were just ordinary chaos. No. Log it and move on. Logged. Will there be anything else? Just the usual request that you stop with the elevator music. Request noted and ignored. Sleep well, Dr. Cole. Adrian made his way to the habitat module, the station's corridor lights dimming to night cycle illumination that turned everything the color of old bruises. His reflection caught in a dark porthole, 34 years old, looking 40, hair that had given up on any particular style, eyes that had seen too many screens. He'd been handsome once, in an academic sort of way. Now he just looked like someone who'd chosen solitude and was beginning to regret the choice, though not enough to do anything about it. The sleep pod welcomed him with its familiar smell of recycled air and the faint chemical tang of the cleaning solution he'd used yesterday. He'd checked the seals twice this morning, a habit born from early paranoia about explosive decompression, though by now he knew every rivet and weld in this section. Everything was exactly as it should be. Everything was exactly as it always was. He stripped down to his regulation sleep shirt, climbed into the pod, and let the foam mattress remember his shape. The station hummed around him, life support, data processors, the distant tick of hull metal expanding and contracting with temperature changes. These were his lullabies now. Adrian closed his eyes and thought about Earth's oceans, the way waves sounded against the California coast where he'd grown up, back when the future had seemed like something other than an endless series of identical days in a tin can at the edge of nothing. Sleep came slowly, pulling him down into darkness where even the elevator music couldn't follow. He didn't hear the sensors detect another anomaly at 03:15 hours, stronger this time, close enough to make the station's hull sing a note just below human hearing. He didn't hear the AI pause in its calculations, spend 0.03 seconds analyzing data that made no sense, then file the event under unexplained but non-threatening, and return to monitoring his breathing. Adrian dreamed of light that tasted like colors he'd never seen, and somewhere in that dream, he thought he might have said something important. But when morning came, he wouldn't remember any of it. Warmth was wrong. That was Adrian's first conscious thought as he drifted up from sleep, his mind cataloging sensations before his eyes opened. Forward Station Epsilon maintained a precise 17 degrees Celsius during night cycle, cool enough to encourage the body toward rest, warm enough to prevent discomfort. The temperature never varied. The station's environmental systems had exactly one job and they performed it with mechanical perfection. But Adrian was warm. Actually warm, the kind of warmth that came from another living body sharing space meant for one. His eyes snapped open. Silver hair spilled across his pillow, catching the dim emergency lighting and reflecting it back in ways that hair shouldn't. Each strand seemed to hold illumination for a moment before releasing it, creating a cascade of delayed light that made his eyes hurt if he focused too hard. The hair belonged to a woman lying beside him in his sleep pod, which was itself impossible because the pod was barely large enough for Adrian and certainly not designed for company. Yet here she was, occupying space that didn't exist, her breathing soft and rhythmic against his shoulder. Adrian's scientific training cataloged details with automatic precision even as panic tried to override rational thought. She wore clothing that looked like fabric but moved like liquid, shifting between deep blue and violet and colors he didn't have words for, shades that seemed to exist slightly to the left of normal perception. The material caught light and released it the same way her hair did, as if photons had to negotiate with it before deciding whether to bounce or pass through. Her face was turned toward him, peaceful in sleep. Human features, definitely human, nose, lips, closed eyes with lashes that seemed too long to be practical. But her ears rose from the silver hair in elegant points, sweeping back along her skull in a shape that evolution had never produced on Earth. Not human. Very much not human. "Station," Adrian whispered, trying not to move, "I need you to explain something." The AI's response came immediately, volume adjusted for night cycle. "Good morning, Dr. Cole. Current time is 05:43 hours. You have 17 minutes until scheduled wake cycle. There's someone in my bed. Incorrect. Life support sensors indicate 2 life forms in the habitat module. That's the same thing. No. Your statement suggested uncertainty about the presence of another individual. I am confirming. Station, how did someone get onto this station? A pause that lasted exactly 0.7 seconds, which for an AI meant something between confusion and mild concern. No vessels have docked with forward station Epsilon. No airlocks have been breached. No proximity alarms have been triggered. Until 05:41 hours, sensors detected only 1 life form aboard this station. Until 2 minutes ago. Correct. Adrian processed this information and found it completely unhelpful. So you're telling me that someone just materialized in my sleep pod? That is not possible according to known physics. And yet, the AI agreed, sounding as close to puzzled as its programming allowed. The woman stirred, shifting closer to him in a way that suggested deep familiarity, the unconscious movement of someone accustomed to sharing space. Her hand found his arm and settled there with casual possession. Adrian froze, every muscle locked, his mind racing through possibilities that ranged from hallucination to elaborate corporate espionage to brain tumor-causing vivid delusions. Then she spoke, words emerging from sleep without her eyes opening, her voice carrying an accent he couldn't place. You promised to stay. The statement hit Adrian like a physical thing, carrying weight that pressed against his chest. The words felt important, significant, as if they referenced something that should matter to him. But his memory held nothing. No context, no recognition, just the unsettling sensation of forgetting something crucial. I've never, Adrian stammered, then stopped because the woman's eyes opened and whatever he'd been about to say evaporated from his mind. Violet. Her eyes were violet with flecks of gold that moved like living things, swirling in patterns that his brain insisted couldn't exist in human irises because eyes didn't work that way. She looked at him with such complete familiarity that Adrian felt like an intruder in his own sleep pod. You really don't remember, she said, and it wasn't a question. Sadness flickered across her face, followed by something that might have been amusement. That's going to make this complicated. Adrian scrambled backward, or tried to. The sleep pod's limited space meant he mostly just pressed himself against the far wall with all the dignity of a startled cat. Who are you? How did you get here? Station, security protocol. Your security systems cannot perceive me under normal circumstances, the woman said, sitting up with fluid grace. She seemed unbothered by his panic, looking around the cramped habitat module with interest. I exist slightly beside your reality. Dimensionally adjacent, you might say, though your language doesn't have good words for it. My language has excellent words. Breaking and entering, for instance. Also trespassing. Illegal boarding of a research station. She smiled at him, and Adrian hated how that smile made him feel momentarily ridiculous for being afraid. I'm not breaking anything. And I was invited, in a manner of speaking. I didn't invite anyone. Not recently. But you did promise to stay. She tilted her head, studying him with those impossible eyes. During the between time. When our dimensions touched. You don't remember any of it, do you? I remember going to sleep alone, which is how I prefer things. That's unfortunate. She reached out and touched the sleep pod's wall, her fingers passing through the material for just a moment before becoming solid again. Your technology is so delightfully primitive. Everything bolted together with such confidence that 3 dimensions is all you need. Adrian watched her hand phase through solid matter and felt his grip on rational explanation slipping. Station, am I having a psychotic break? Your neurological readings are elevated but within parameters for extreme stress. No evidence of hallucinatory states. The other life form appears to be objectively present. Appears to be. Sensor readings are inconsistent. She registers on thermal and audio sensors but not on mass detection or electromagnetic scanning. It's as if she exists in some measurements but not others. The woman laughed, a sound like water over stones. I like your machine. It's trying so hard to make sense of me. She looked back at Adrian, still sitting in his sleep pod with her legs crossed, completely at ease despite occupying a space that should be threatening to decompress into vacuum at any moment. My name is Lyria Sovun Ketharis. You used to call me Lyri, before you forgot. I'm from the distant throne, which your people haven't discovered yet because you keep looking in the wrong directions. The wrong directions. Out. You keep looking out into space. We're beside you, folded into dimensions you haven't learned to perceive yet. She gestured vaguely, and for a moment Adrian thought he saw the habitat module's walls ripple, revealing spaces that couldn't fit inside the station's known architecture. Then everything snapped back to normal and he wondered if he'd seen anything at all. This isn't happening, Adrian said, mostly to himself. It very much is. And I'm afraid we're going to be spending quite a bit of time together, so you should probably accept that. Lyria glanced around the module again, then focused on something past Adrian's shoulder. Is that coffee? The brown liquid in the thermal container? That's yesterday's coffee. It's probably toxic by now. Perfect. I've been asleep for 17 years and I would very much like to try something toxic. She stood, moving past him with impossible grace given the pod's confined space, and Adrian caught the scent of something like lavender mixed with ozone and mathematics. The habitat module shouldn't smell like anything except recycled air and cleaning solution, but somehow it did now, as if she'd brought atmosphere from wherever she'd come from. Lyria picked up his coffee container, sniffed it, made a face that suggested she'd discovered something fascinating and terrible, and took a drink anyway. Her expression went through several rapid transformations before settling on diplomatic. This is aggressively brown. It's been sitting for 14 hours. That explains so much. She took another sip anyway, seeming genuinely interested in the experience of drinking bad coffee. Your people are remarkable. You go to all this trouble to cross space, to build these stations and push into the void, and then you drink this. Adrian found himself standing without remembering the decision to move, putting distance between himself and this impossible woman who knew his name and claimed he'd made promises he couldn't remember. His favorite blanket, the one thermal regulation blanket he'd actually brought from Earth, was wrapped around her shoulders. She'd stolen his blanket. I'm calling Earth, he said, moving toward the comm station. I'm reporting an unauthorized presence and requesting immediate extraction. You could do that, Lyria agreed, still examining the coffee container with scientific fascination. But it would take your people 6 months to send a ship, and by then I'll be gone anyway. The dimensions are already drifting apart again. We have perhaps 2 weeks, maybe 3, before I'm pulled back home. Good. Wonderful. I can wait 2 weeks. Can you? She looked at him over the rim of the coffee container, those gold-flecked violet eyes seeing something Adrian couldn't identify. I don't think you can. Because part of you remembers, even if your conscious mind doesn't. Part of you knows exactly who I am. And the terrible thing was, standing there in his habitat module at 05:57 hours station time with elevator music starting to filter through the speakers because the AI had decided now was an appropriate moment, Adrian felt something stir in the back of his mind. Not a memory exactly, but the shape where a memory should be. The ghost of something important that he'd somehow misplaced. You promised to stay, Lyria said again, softer this time. And I've been dreaming of you ever since. Adrian made more coffee. It was the only thing his brain could manage, a simple task with clear steps while reality rearranged itself around him. Lyria had settled into the station's observation lounge, a generous term for a compartment barely large enough for 2 chairs and a porthole, and was currently pressed against the transparent aluminum like a child at an aquarium. Your stars are different from this angle, she said, her breath fogging the port. We see them through 7 layers of folded space. They look softer there. Kinder, somehow. Stars aren't kind, Adrian said, measuring freeze-dried coffee crystals with more precision than necessary. They're massive fusion reactions held together by gravity. They don't have opinions about us. That's what makes them kind. They burn without judgment. She traced a constellation on the port that Adrian didn't recognize. In my dimension, we have things that watch back. It's unsettling. The coffee maker gurgled, and Adrian focused on that sound because it was normal and mechanical and completely unrelated to dimensional adjacency or impossible women who claimed he'd made promises in places he'd never been. Station had been running diagnostics for the past hour, trying to make sense of sensor readings that contradicted themselves. Life signs present but not present. Mass detected but unmeasurable. The AI had even tried rebooting itself, which Adrian hadn't known was possible and suspected was the computer equivalent of giving up. You said we met during something called the between time, Adrian said, carrying 2 cups toward the lounge. Explain that. Lyria accepted the coffee with both hands, cradling it like something precious. Every few centuries, when stellar bodies align in specific configurations, the membrane between dimensions becomes permeable. Not physically, you can't walk through, but consciously. Minds can perceive across the fold. Usually it's brief, seconds maybe, and most people dismiss it as dreams or hallucinations. But not this time. Not with us. She sipped the fresh coffee and her expression suggested she'd discovered it wasn't significantly better than the 14-hour-old version. This is still aggressively brown, but in a different way. I'll add coffee criticism to the list of impossible things happening today. You should. It's important to maintain perspective. Lyria turned from the porthole to face him fully. 4 months ago, your time, there was an alignment. Your station happened to be positioned at a resonance point, a place where dimensional barriers are naturally thinner. You perceived me. I perceived you. And instead of lasting seconds like it should have, we stayed connected for nearly an hour. Adrian searched his memory and found nothing. 4 months ago he'd been 2 weeks into his posting, still adjusting to the isolation, still running through his routines with fresh enthusiasm that hadn't yet calcified into habit. The logs from that period showed normal operations, normal readings, nothing unusual except. Station, he said slowly, pull up the anomaly reports from my 2nd week aboard. Displaying now. A holographic screen materialized between them, scrolling through dated entries. On June 3rd, sensors detected widespread electromagnetic interference lasting approximately 57 minutes. All systems reported fluctuations in local spacetime measurements. I classified the event as a passing gravitational wave from an unknown source. There, Lyria said, pointing at the timestamp. That was us. The between time. You thought you were dreaming. Adrian stared at the data, at the graph showing reality hiccuping for nearly an hour. He'd been alone in the observation lounge that night, couldn't sleep, had been staring at the stars and thinking about Earth and everyone he'd left behind. He remembered feeling strange, disconnected, like the station was drifting through something thicker than vacuum. And there'd been a flash of memory, sudden and fragmentary. Light that shouldn't exist, colors that hurt to perceive, and a voice asking him questions. What are you running from? Why did you choose the empty spaces? Are you afraid of being known? I remember light, Adrian said quietly. I thought I was having a stroke. You were having a conversation. With me. Lyria set down her coffee and stood, moving to stand beside him. She was tall, nearly his height, and standing this close Adrian could see that her skin had an odd quality to it, as if she existed in slightly higher resolution than everything around her. You told me about Earth. About oceans. You'd never seen our waters, so I showed you what we have, seas that flow in 5 dimensions, where you can swim through yesterday if you know the currents. That's not possible. And yet you described them back to me. Perfectly. She smiled, but there was sadness in it. You were the first person I'd ever met who didn't know what I was supposed to be. In my world, I'm royalty, the Sovun Kethris line, memory keepers of the distant throne. Every conversation I have is shaped by protocol, by expectation, by politics I didn't choose. But you didn't know any of that. You just asked questions because you were curious. Adrian tried to reconcile this with his complete lack of memory. What did I promise? To stay. To be there when I woke. Lyria's expression shifted to something between amusement and exasperation. I tried to explain that our dimensions were separating, that the between time was ending, that we might never perceive each other again. And you said, she adopted a deeper voice, clearly mimicking him, then I'll be here when they realign. However long it takes. You were very dramatic about it. I don't do dramatic. You did that night. It was refreshing. She moved back to the porthole, pressing her palm against it. Her hand phased through for a moment, extending into vacuum that should have killed her, then returned to solidity. In your dimension, 4 months passed. In mine, I went into stasis because that's what memory keepers do during dimensional drift, we sleep to preserve our consciousness intact. For me, it's been 17 years of dreaming. Dreaming of you, of our conversation, of the promise you made. The implications of that made Adrian's chest tight. 17 years. I was 23 when we met. I'm 40 now, technically, though my body aged maybe 6 months during stasis. She laughed, but it sounded brittle. When I woke, everyone assumed I'd forgotten you. That's what usually happens, between time encounters fade like normal dreams. But I hadn't forgotten. The connection we made, it was stronger than it should have been. It created what we call a resonance knot. Which means I'm bound to you across dimensional barriers. And when the dimensions realigned again yesterday, I didn't just perceive you, I manifested here. Pulled across the fold by the resonance. She turned back to him, and those violet eyes were unsettlingly direct. I'm as trapped here as you are confused by my presence. The knot won't release until the dimensions drift apart again, or until we both consciously sever it. Adrian processed this, trying to find the flaw in her logic, the place where this stopped being real and became something he could explain away. So you're telling me that I accidentally bound an alien princess to my space station through quantum entanglement of consciousness? Essentially, yes. Though I prefer memory keeper to princess. The latter sounds like I should be rescued from towers. And you've spent 17 years dreaming about me. Not continuously. That would be exhausting. Lyria picked up her coffee again, examining it with renewed skepticism. But yes. You featured prominently in my subconscious. It was awkward explaining to the court therapists why I kept drawing pictures of someone they couldn't perceive. The absurdity of the situation was beginning to override Adrian's panic. He'd come out here to be alone, to escape complications, and somehow he'd managed to accidentally romance someone from another dimension and forget about it entirely. It was almost impressive in its thoroughness as a disaster. Station, he said, update your threat assessment on our guest. Current assessment, unknown but non-hostile. Also possibly immune to vacuum, which is concerning from a physics standpoint but not a security one. That's your professional opinion? Dr. Cole, I am a station AI designed to monitor scientific equipment and maintain life support. I was not programmed for interdimensional diplomacy. I am doing my best. Lyria laughed at that, a genuine sound that made the observation lounge feel less claustrophobic. I like your machine very much. Does it always sound so aggrieved? Only since you arrived. Before that it just played elevator music. I can still do that if it would help, Station offered. It would not help, Adrian and Lyria said simultaneously, then looked at each other with expressions of mutual surprise. The moment stretched, awkward and strange, and Adrian felt that ghost memory stirring again, the shape of familiarity, the sense that he should know this person even though his conscious mind held no recollection of their meeting. She was watching him with patient curiosity, waiting for him to catch up to what she already knew. Why me? Adrian asked finally. In all the universe, all the dimensions, why did we connect? Lyria considered this, swirling her coffee like it might contain answers. The between time isn't random. It connects compatible consciousnesses, minds that resonate at similar frequencies. You were alone in the dark, questioning why you'd chosen isolation. I was alone in a palace full of people, questioning why I felt isolated anyway. We were both looking for something we couldn't name. And we found each other. For 57 minutes, yes. And apparently you found me compelling enough to make promises you'd immediately forget. She smiled at him, wry and warm. I'm either very memorable or you make a habit of committing to impossible things. I don't commit to anything. That's why I'm here. And yet. Lyria gestured at the space between them, at the improbable fact of her presence. Here I am. Your frozen vegetables are judging you from the storage unit, by the way. I can feel their disappointment. Adrian blinked. What? You keep frozen vegetables but never cook them. I checked your logs while you were making coffee. It's tragic. How is that relevant to anything? It's not. But we're going to be stuck together for at least 2 weeks, and I've already learned that you make terrible coffee and keep vegetables you'll never eat. I'm establishing a baseline for your character. She moved past him toward the corridor, her light fabric clothing rippling with colors that didn't exist. Now show me the rest of this station. I want to understand why you chose this particular empty space to hide in. Adrian spent the next 3 days trying to prove Lyria didn't exist. It wasn't personal, he explained this to her repeatedly while running tests, but the scientific method demanded skepticism. She took it well, mostly by ignoring his instruments and asking questions about everything she touched. This measures background radiation. Lyria held up a handheld scanner, turning it over in her hands. The device's display flickered between normal readings and symbols Adrian didn't recognize. It did before you touched it. Now it's having an existential crisis. Adrian made notes on his tablet, documenting the way equipment malfunctioned in her presence. Not catastrophically, nothing exploded or vented atmosphere, but devices seemed confused about what they were supposed to measure. Station, are you recording this? Yes, though I should note that my recordings of Lyria appear different each time I review them. The timestamp remains constant but her position in frame shifts by several centimeters between playbacks. That's because you're perceiving me through three-dimensional sensors, Lyria said, setting down the scanner. She'd moved on to examining Adrian's collection of physical books, actual paper volumes he'd brought from Earth because some nights the data tablets felt too ephemeral. I exist in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Your equipment captures different cross-sections depending on quantum fluctuations in the observation field. That's not how observation works. In your dimension. She pulled out a book, 20th century poetry, something Adrian had grabbed randomly from his apartment before leaving Earth, and flipped through pages with genuine interest. These symbols are beautiful. So inefficient for conveying meaning, but beautiful. You have to decode them linearly, one after another, building context as you progress. That's called reading. We absorb information multidimensionally. A concept arrives complete with context, emotional resonance, and 17 layers of subtext simultaneously. Lyria looked up from the book, her violet eyes catching the overhead lights. It's more efficient but less intimate. Your way feels like unwrapping gifts. Each word is a small discovery. Adrian found himself smiling despite his determination to remain scientifically detached. You make reading sound romantic. Everything is romantic if you pay enough attention. Even your frozen vegetables have a certain tragic grandeur. We're not talking about the vegetables again. We should. They represent something important about you, potential you acknowledge but refuse to actualize. Why buy them if you won't cook them? Because I intended to cook them. Then I got busy. For 3 months. It's been a complicated quarter. Adrian took the poetry book from her hands, noting how the pages felt warmer where she'd touched them, as if her presence raised local temperatures in ways the station's sensors couldn't quite track. "You're changing the subject. We were discussing how you're breaking my equipment." "I'm not breaking anything. I'm just demonstrating that your instruments measure a limited spectrum of reality." Lyria moved through the lab module with fluid grace, touching surfaces that rippled at her contact. For a moment Adrian saw the station differently, walls becoming translucent, revealing spaces folded inside spaces, corridors extending in directions that violated Euclidean geometry. Then she lifted her hand and everything snapped back to normal. "You've built all this to measure 3 dimensions plus time. But there are at least 11 dimensions in most models, and we've confirmed 17. You're trying to understand the universe while deliberately ignoring most of it. We work with what we can perceive. Then perceive more." She turned to face him fully, and Adrian felt that strange weight again, the sensation of memory pressing against the inside of his skull. "That's what you're doing here, isn't it? That's why you volunteered for isolation at the edge of mapped space. You're trying to perceive something beyond the normal human experience." The observation was too accurate to be comfortable. Adrian set down his tablet, abandoning the pretense of scientific documentation. "I came here to study potential xenolinguistic signals in the nebula. You came here to run away from someone who wanted to know you too well." Lyria's voice was gentle but relentless. "You told me during the between time. A relationship that demanded you perform a version of yourself instead of being yourself. You got tired of the performance, but by then you'd forgotten which parts were real and which were costume. So you volunteered for a posting where performance was impossible because there was no audience." Adrian's chest felt tight. "I don't remember telling you that." "I know. But I remember. I remember everything about those 57 minutes. She moved closer, not threatening but present in a way that made the lab feel smaller. "You told me you'd spent years becoming what other people needed, the good student, the promising researcher, the reliable partner. And you'd done it so well you'd erased yourself in the process. Out here, alone, you thought you might find who you actually were underneath all that adaptation. Did you practice that speech? Because it feels rehearsed. I've had 17 years to think about our conversation. Some parts might have crystallized." She smiled, acknowledging the deflection but not accepting it. "Have you found yourself yet? After 3 months alone?" Adrian wanted to lie, to claim he'd achieved some profound self-discovery, but Lyria's eyes made dishonesty feel pointless. "I've mostly found out that I'm boring without an audience. Turns out the performance might have been the only interesting thing about me." "That's not true. You've known me for 3 days. I've known you for 17 years. You've just forgotten our introduction." Lyria reached out and touched his hand, her fingers warm and solid and slightly wrong in ways his nerves couldn't quite process. "During the between time, you showed me your memories. Not intentionally, when consciousness bridges dimensions, barriers dissolve. I saw your childhood, your education, the relationships you navigated, the slow erosion of whoever you were before you learned to be what was expected. And I saw something else too." "What?" "The person you could be if you stopped performing. If you let yourself be unknown and uncertain and imperfect." Her hand squeezed his gently. "That person was interesting. That person made promises to impossible alien women just because it felt true in the moment." Adrian wanted to pull away but couldn't. The contact was doing something strange, his vision kept flickering, showing the lab overlaid with other spaces. He saw a palace made of light and mathematics, towers extending into dimensions his brain refused to process. He saw Lyria younger, standing in a hall full of people who watched her with calculating eyes. He saw himself through her perception, sitting in this station during the between time, speaking with animation about linguistic theory while his hands gestured at stars he couldn't name. "Stop," he said, and she released him immediately. The visions vanished, leaving only the normal lab with its normal equipment and its abnormal guest. "What was that?" The resonance not. When we touch, sometimes the barrier's thin. You perceive fragments of my memory, I perceive yours. It's uncomfortable at first. Lyria flexed her fingers, looking at her own hand with curiosity. I should have warned you. In my dimension, this kind of connection is intimate but not unusual. Here, I suppose it's invasive. It's something. Adrian's heart was racing, his scientific training warring with the undeniable evidence that consciousness worked differently than he'd been taught. You can see my memories. Not on purpose. And only when we're in contact. The resonance allows information exchange both ways. She moved back to the bookshelf, putting distance between them. I'll avoid touching you unless necessary. I know this is already overwhelming. Overwhelming is an understatement. Adrian sat down at his workstation, trying to organize thoughts that kept fragmenting. In 3 days, you've violated basically every law of physics, demonstrated that consciousness is non-local, and implied that my entire understanding of reality is artificially limited. Also, you hate my coffee and judge my vegetable choices. The coffee is genuinely terrible, though. That's objective fact across all dimensions. That's fair. Adrian laughed, surprised by how natural it felt. 3 days ago, he'd been alone with nothing but routine and silence. Now he was debating physics with someone who existed in 7 dimensions and had strong opinions about his frozen food. Station, am I adapting to this situation too quickly? Should I be more disturbed? Your psychological profile suggests high adaptability to novel situations combined with tendency toward intellectualization as coping mechanism. Current behavior is consistent with baseline personality. The AI paused. Also, your cortisol levels have decreased 23% since Lyria's arrival despite the objectively stressful circumstances. You may actually be enjoying this. I'm not enjoying the complete overthrow of my understanding of reality. But you're enjoying the company, Lyria said, not quite a question. Adrian considered denying it, then remembered he was trying to stop performing. Yes. Which is strange because I came here specifically to avoid company. You came here to avoid performing for company. This is different. I already know the parts you were hiding. I saw them during the between time. She picked up the poetry book again, running her fingers over the embossed cover. You can't disappoint me with your authentic self because that's what I'm connected to. The resonance knot doesn't bind to masks. That should terrify me. Does it? Adrian searched himself honestly and found something unexpected. No. It's oddly freeing. Good. Lyria opened the book randomly, reading aloud in her accented voice that made English sound like music. We loved the way a candle loves its flame, consuming and consumed. Do your people really think like this? Everything metaphor and paradox? Poets do. They make careers out of saying things sideways. I love that. Sideways truth. Like observing 3-dimensional reality from a 7-dimensional perspective. She looked up at him, gold flecks swirling in her violet eyes. Teach me more about your dimension. Show me how humans perceive reality when they're being honest. That's a complicated request. We have 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if the dimensions drift slowly. Lyria set down the book and moved toward the corridor leading to the observation lounge. Start with something simple. Show me why you keep the frozen vegetables instead of just disposing of them. That's not simple at all. Exactly. Nothing true is simple. But you knew that already. You just forgot while you were performing simplicity for people who wanted easy answers. She paused at the corridor entrance, looking back at him with an expression that mixed challenge and invitation. Come on, Dr. Adrian Cole. Show me who you are when nobody's watching. Even though I'm watching. Especially because I'm watching. Adrian stood, abandoning his workstation and its careful documentation of impossible phenomena. The vegetables represent hope. I knew it. Tell me everything. And somehow, impossibly, Adrian found himself wanting to. The dimensions were drifting apart. Adrian felt it before station's sensors confirmed it, a subtle wrongness in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm when pressure drops and reality holds its breath. Lyria felt it too. She'd become quieter over the past day, spending long hours pressed against the observation port, watching stars that looked different to her than they did to him. How long? Adrian asked, finding her in the lounge at 0300 hours when neither of them could sleep. 2 days. Maybe less. Lyria didn't turn from the porthole. Her silver hair caught the starlight, still doing that impossible thing where it held illumination too long. The resonance knot is weakening. I can feel the pull back to my dimension. Like gravity, but for consciousness. Adrian sat in a chair beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. They'd learned to navigate proximity carefully, too much contact and memories bled through, showing each other things that felt too intimate, too raw. But some contact was necessary. Some contact was what made the isolation bearable. What happens when you go back? He asked. I returned to the distant throne. To my duties as memory keeper, to the political complications I was avoiding when I went into stasis. 17 years have passed there too. The court will have changed. The alliances I knew will have shifted. She finally looked at him, and Adrian saw exhaustion in her violet eyes. I'll have to explain where I was, what I experienced. They won't understand. How could they? I barely understand it myself. You could tell them you were bound to an irritable xenolinguist who makes terrible coffee. I could. They'd think I'd lost my mind during stasis. It happens sometimes, consciousness fragmenting across dimensional barriers, creating false memories of impossible places. She smiled, but it was sad. Maybe that's what you are. A very persistent hallucination. Station, confirm that I'm not a hallucination. Confirmed. You are objectively real and moderately irritating. The AI had developed more personality over the past 2 weeks, as if Lyria's presence had infected it with the capacity for opinions. Though I will miss the conversations once Lyria departs. Dr. Cole's conversational range is limited to scientific complaints and self-deprecation. That's not true. Sometimes I complain about the coffee. Which you make, Lyria pointed out. Yes, but I complain very articulately about it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching space do what space did, exist vastly and indifferently. Adrian had spent 3 months alone before Lyria arrived, and he thought he understood isolation. But now, facing the prospect of her departure, he realized he'd only understood one kind of loneliness. There was another kind waiting, the loneliness of being known completely and then having that witness disappear. During the between time, Adrian said slowly, when I made that promise to stay, to be here when you woke, did I understand what I was promising? No. Neither of us did. We thought we were having a temporary connection, something that would fade like a dream. Lyria turned from the porthole to face him fully. But consciousness doesn't work the way we think it does. Connection has weight. Meaning has mass. When you promised to stay, you created a tether across dimensional barriers. And I held on to it for 17 years. That's a long time to hold on to something. It was all I had. Everyone else saw the Sovun Ketharis, the memory keeper, the political piece to be maneuvered. You saw Lyri, just a person who asked questions about oceans. She reached out and took his hand, and Adrian felt the familiar flicker of shared perception beginning. I need to show you something. It might be uncomfortable. More uncomfortable than watching my memories of failed relationships play out from your perspective. Different uncomfortable. Are you ready? Adrian squeezed her hand. Show me. The lab dissolved. Adrian found himself standing in the between time, though he'd never consciously experienced it before. The space was neither his dimension nor hers, it was the fold between, a place constructed from overlapping perceptions. He saw himself 4 months ago, sitting in this observation lounge, staring at stars and thinking about all the ways he'd erased himself to become acceptable. And he saw Lyria, young and frightened and desperately alone despite being surrounded by her people. She was reaching across dimensional barriers because anything was better than another day of performing for a court that valued her function over her personhood. They'd found each other in that fold, two people trying to be invisible in different ways. And they'd talked, really talked, with the kind of honesty that only happens when you think the conversation doesn't matter, when you believe you'll never see this person again so there's no consequence to truth. Adrian watched himself promise to stay, and he finally understood what he'd meant. Not that he'd wait for her to return. That he'd stay himself, the awkward, uncertain, imperfect person he was without the performance. That he wouldn't erase himself again just because it was easier than being known. "I remember," Adrian said, and he did. Not clearly, not in linear sequence, but he remembered the feeling of that conversation. The lightness of being understood without having to explain. "I meant it. The promise. I know you did." Lyria pulled them back to the present, to the observation lounge with its regular 3 dimensions and its predictable physics. "That's why the resonance not formed. Because we both meant it, even though we didn't understand the implications." Adrian's hand was still in hers, warm and solid and temporary. "What happens to the knot when you leave?" "It severs. Has to, the dimensional separation will tear it apart. We'll lose the connection." She looked at their joined hands. "But there's another option. If you choose it." "Which is?" "The knot can be reinforced instead of severed. If we both consciously maintain it, if we accept the connection fully, then you could exist in both dimensions simultaneously. Partially here, partially there, consciousness bridging the fold." Lyria's voice was careful, neutral, giving him space to decide. "You'd have to leave the station. Leave your dimension entirely. And there's no guarantee it would work. Nobody's tried to maintain resonance across dimensional drift before." Adrian processed this, his scientific training immediately cataloging objections. "I'd be abandoning my research. My contract. My entire reality. Yes. I'd be choosing to exist in a state that violates known physics based on a connection I barely remember making with someone I've known for 2 weeks. Also yes. Station, analysis please." The AI's response was immediate. "This is beyond my programming, Dr. Cole. I can tell you that your psychological baseline shows 47% reduction in anxiety markers since Lyria's arrival. I can confirm that you smile more frequently, complain less about isolation, and have actually cooked the frozen vegetables twice. Beyond that, I cannot advise on matters of dimensional transcendence or metaphysical commitment." "You cooked the vegetables?" Lyria's eyes widened. "When?" "Last night while you were sleeping. Made a stir-fry. It was mediocre but edible." Adrian felt his face warm. "The point is I actualized the potential. Like you said. That's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, and I grew up in a dimension where people court through mathematical proofs of devotion. I'm not trying to be romantic. I'm trying to make a rational decision about whether to abandon my entire existence for someone who judges my coffee. Your coffee deserves judgment." Lyria's expression shifted, becoming serious. "Adrian, I'm not asking you to come with me. I'm offering it as an option because the resonance knot makes it possible. But you have a life here. Research that matters. Eventually, you'd reconnect with Earth, with the human connections you left behind. You'd figure out who you are without the performance. I've seen it in your memories, you're already starting to find that person. And if I come with you, then you'd be truly unknown. Nobody in my dimension has context for humans. You'd be strange and foreign and constantly explaining yourself. The court would find you fascinating or horrifying or both. You'd never stop being an outsider." She squeezed his hand gently. "It would be difficult. Lonely in different ways than this station. But you'd be there. I'd be there. Being equally strange in my own world, just like I was before. We could be strange together. Adrian looked out at the stars, at the vast indifferent universe that had seemed like refuge 3 months ago. He'd come here to hide from being known, and instead he'd accidentally connected with someone who knew him completely. The irony wasn't lost on him. Station, what would you do? I am an artificial intelligence designed to maintain station operations. I do not have preferences about metaphysical choices. A pause. However, if I were capable of wanting things, I would want you to stop making decisions based on what seems rational and start making them based on what seems true. That's surprisingly philosophical for a station AI. I've had an unusual 2 weeks. Lyria's presence has been educational. Lyria laughed at that, the sound filling the observation lounge with warmth. I'm going to miss your machine. Tell it I'm sorry for breaking its sensors. You're leaving tonight, Adrian said, not quite a question. Soon. The pull is getting stronger. If I wait much longer, the separation will be violent, consciousness torn across dimensions rather than gently released. She stood, still holding his hand. You don't have to decide now. You can let the knot sever, return to your research, complete your contract. In 7 months, you'll go back to Earth and resume your life. This will feel like a strange dream you once had. Will you remember me? Every day. For the rest of my life. However long that is. She pulled him to his feet, and they stood facing each other in the small lounge. You showed me that being known doesn't have to mean being consumed. That truth can exist without performance. That's worth remembering. Adrian looked at her, really looked, at this impossible woman from folded dimensions who'd crashed into his isolation and refused to let him hide. She was strange and frustrating and uncomfortably perceptive. She made terrible observations about his frozen vegetables and somehow that had broken through defenses he'd spent years building. When I made that promise, Adrian said quietly, to stay, to be myself, I think I was really promising to stop running from connection just because it was frightening. Probably. And coming with you would be another kind of running. Leaving my dimension to avoid dealing with my life here. Also probably. Lyria's expression was patient, accepting. Truth is complicated. Sometimes running towards something and running away from something look identical from the outside. But they feel different. Yes. They feel different. Adrian took a breath, feeling the weight of choice settle in his chest. The station hummed around them, life support and processors and all the familiar sounds of the only home he'd known for 3 months. Beyond the porthole, stars burned without judgment, indifferent to human decisions about consciousness and connection. I actualized the vegetables, Adrian said finally. Maybe it's time to actualize the rest. Lyria's smile was incandescent. You're sure? Absolutely not. But I'm choosing anyway. He squeezed her hand, feeling the membrane between dimensions growing thin. Besides, someone needs to teach your people about proper coffee preparation. It's a humanitarian mission. The coffee is a lost cause. Then I'll spend eternity trying. I'm very stubborn when it comes to terrible beverages. The observation lounge began to ripple, walls becoming translucent, revealing the folded spaces beyond. Adrian felt himself becoming untethered from singular reality, consciousness expanding into dimensions he'd never perceived. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely impossible, which made it perfectly appropriate. Station, Adrian said as the laboratory dissolved around them, continue monitoring the nebulous signals. Someone should keep listening. Understood, Dr. Cole. For what it's worth, this has been the least boring assignment of my operational existence. Mine too. And then the fold opened completely, and Adrian stepped through, holding hands with someone who'd spent 17 years dreaming of a promise he'd forgotten making. He was leaving behind his research, his contract, his carefully constructed isolation. He was choosing unknown over safety, connection over control, truth over performance. It was possibly the worst decision he'd ever made. It felt exactly right. The stars watched them go, burning steadily in the dark, and somewhere in Forward Station Epsilon, a collection of frozen vegetables sat in storage, finally actualized in their own small way. The AI made note of this in its logs, filed the observation under metaphorically significant, and resumed monitoring the cosmic background radiation. Sometimes it still sounded like pancake recipes. Sometimes that was enough.